The schism that's driving politics in the nation's capital. How much real heat, if any, will our delegates feel? In contrast to a toxic Washington, a seemingly tranquil Arkansas, but for how long? Public education and private enterprise headed where in the next dozen months? We'll preview the year ahead in our first edition of the new decade on Arkansas Week next.
Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and KUAR-FM 89.
Hello again, everyone. Thanks for joining us on our first broadcast of the new year, a new decade. And with state and federal politics coloring just about every aspect of life in Arkansas, we'll use the minutes ahead to try to divine what's ahead. Joining us on the round table, Heather Yates of the Political Science faculty at UCA. Jay Barth, formerly of the Political Science staff at Hendrix College, emeritus now, immediate past chair of the State Board of Education, and now the City of Little Rock's first Chief Education Officer. Wes Brown, editor and publisher of the Daily Record. And thanks to everybody for coming in. Madness in Washington, from left or right, choose your own adjective. Heather, what's the fallout here?
In Arkansas, not very much. I mean, the Arkansas delegation is very loyal to the Republican Party, and unless they bolt from the Republican Party, which I don't anticipate they will be doing in an election year, it's still going to remain relatively tranquil for the Republican Party in the local districts.
Yeah, Jay?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is, I totally agree with Heather, we do have a couple of members of that delegation, and then the governor, who do have their own potential future national ambitions in a post-Trump Republican Party, and how they kind of engage in this dance around Trump's politics is going to be particularly interesting, I think, for Governor Hutchinson, and then, of course, for Senator Tom Cotton, both of whom could be running for president within months.
Yeah, and I still see, when you look at, Jay mentioned the post-Trump era, we don't know when or if that will take place, but I still think trade and the issues of the deficit, which is growing, are really big issues. But I don't see in Arkansas there's not going to be much change. But there could be some fallout on some of the trade issues, especially with Arkansas's large agri-community, manufacturing, and some sectors that are still, and there's no USMCA agreement yet in place yet, the follow-up to the NAFTA. So I still think that there could be some kickback on those particular issues going forward.
Before we go any further on that, Jay mentioned the post-Trump era. What is the post-Trump era? Will Trumpism end whether he serves one term or less than one term, two, or one or two terms?
I think the grand question in American politics is, there certainly has been a realignment in terms of partisan allegiance and what the demographic underpinnings of those two parties' bases are. That, I think, is not going to change, but what is the personality that fills that void? And a big question probably is, how long does the Trump era last, right? Is he successful in gaining re-election? That certainly extends the Trump era much longer and solidifies that era. What is that performance of the president moving forward in terms of his evaluation on the part of voters? Economics obviously playing a big role in that. It's a truly fascinating time to be studying American politics because we don't get to do realignments that often. We are clearly in the midst of one, and it is one with huge ramifications for that party and the whole system.
Yeah, Heather, you look at race, gender, demographics.
Right, and I also would like to comment on a little bit of a nuance about ideological struggle within the Republican Party in the era of Trump, because I think the era of Trump is defined for as long as Trump is the standard bearer of the party. So I also think, to add to Jay's point, is what is the era of Trumpism? Because Trumpism is Trump's stamp on the party, and how long does that last after Trump? And right now within the Republican Party, there are some real fissures. There are some conservative Republicans who are opposing Donald Trump because they look at this ideological struggle that emerged in the party because of the insurgent-styled politics that emerged with the Tea Party. So there's this tug of war over this so-called middle ground is not associated with something that we refer to when we talk about conservative politics in the Republican Party. But over the ideological struggle, the anti-Trump Republicans see this as a struggle of recapturing the party of Reagan.
Where are they? Where's the struggle, though? I mean,
yeah, I think whenever the anti-Trumps or the so-called never-Trumpers, anytime they speak out, they are immediately castigated or
zapped.
Zapped by the president or his MAGA followers. So when you talk about going forward after Trump, I don't know if it's going to be the same party that you can't go back into the Reagan years or the years, even the Bush years. I think it's going to be something entirely new that's more identified with Trump. And I think what you're going to have, again, just as the Tea Party came out, I think you're going to have a new revolution of some kind of movement back to traditional conservatism. That emerges after Trump years, because that is the one thing that has not been talked about, the issue of deficits, which was a true hallmark of the Republican Party, real issues that conservatives centered around. That's not the party we know now.
But interestingly, I think there is going to be this factional battle after Trumpism. And from an Arkansas perspective, I mean, I think Senator Cotton and Governor Hutchinson may be on different sides of that battle. I mean, with Senator Cotton certainly buying much more into a Trumpism with a twist, obviously, but Governor Hutchinson, who clearly has been momentarily resistant, but has folded in during the Trump era.
Yeah.
But to answer your question about where this resistance is occurring, we see it with newly emergent groups this year, and we also see the libertarian think tanks actually harboring a lot of this resistance. We're seeing it from George Conway, who we know is a spouse to a very high-profile White House counsel. We also are seeing it from Bill Kristol, who just organized Defending Democracy Together and also a Policy Institute and some PACs. George Conway just mentioned the Lincoln Project yesterday, so that's a new PAC that is going to stand in opposition to Trump. Now, how successful they'll be is the question, but we see these enclaves of resistance emerging within the Federalist Society, because the George Conway also established a loose network of attorneys within the Federalist Society called Checks and Balances. So we have a lot of these different enclaves there, and to build on both points made at this table is that there is a struggle to try to recapture that old Republican Party, but because I do think that they see on the horizon what's at stake, and they see this party of Reagan, this era of this conservatism that he restructured and recuperated, slipping away. Now, what's taking that place? There's a vacuum, there's a void, and there's individuals like Tom Cotton who want to step into that, who are going to be entrepreneurs, and they're going to exploit an opportunity for their own personal careers. And if you're an ambitious politician, why wouldn't you? Right? Because there's a lot of individuals who have seen Trump as that opportunity to exploit, to expand their careers. So we're still sitting at the top of 2020, trying to figure out what this year is going to look like in terms of defining the Republican brand and defining the Trumpism, really.
If there would be any federal race in Arkansas next year that would pose some difficulty to an incumbent, it would appear the second district. What do we think? The fallout for Mr. Hill.
Well, I think
well-known Democratic nominee,
right,
Senator.
Yeah. So it was obviously the close race in Arkansas in 2018 as well, with a lot of national interest. I think Senator Joyce Elliott, who ran in 2010 as the nominee and was really beaten very badly in that cycle, which was a big cycle for Republicanism in the state. The real question, in a weird way, I think she is a much better fit for the politics of 2020 than she was for the politics of 2010, because she is a big personality who is very clear in her ideology. She has good use of social media. I mean, she has some of those things that are a good fit for 2020. I think the fundamental question is, do national actors engage in that race, or do they see other more plum opportunities around the nation? Because she has to have outside money to make that even a competitive race. If not, she probably does better than in 2010 because of changing demographics in the district, but that's a long way from winning a race.
I think
legislature particularly we need to look at too.
Right. And to comment on Joyce Elliott's candidacy, I do think that in 2020 she does have the ability to attract outside money more so than she did in 2010, because 2010 too was also a year for the Tea Party. It's that insurgent style politics again, it's that anti-establishment, it's anti-Obama, so there's that intersectionality of race involved in this as well too. And so coming off of the 2018 midterm year that saw a record number of women elected not only to the Arkansas state legislature but to also the federal Congress, this is making Joyce Elliott a much more competitive candidate in terms of not just on identity, but money and messaging too. And French Hill is going to have to engage Joyce Elliott on a message where he kind of ignored Clark Tucker and talked past Clark Tucker, because Clark Tucker's message was very singular, and Joyce Elliott brings something much more nuanced. And this also has, we're in a campaign year, a presidential campaign year, and whenever you have presidential candidates at the top of the ballot, that has the propensity to nationalize all the down ballot races. So that has the propensity to play out here, not only in the federal races, but our state legislative races too. As insane as this sounds, that in this era of Trump, even mayoral races have been nationalized under this rubric of politics. So I think that we're going to see nationalization, not in terms of maybe national attention. I do think that the Arkansas 2nd District is going to get national attention. But I think the state legislature too has, it depends on if you're talking about the Republican state legislators or the Democratic state legislators too, because I've mentioned that the state of the Democratic Party in this, in Arkansas is distressed. And
and I see that 2nd District, it still comes down to Trump. I still think that she talked about the down ballot issues. Trump's presence on the ballot is still going to have a huge impact on every single race, and even the 2nd District race. The Democratic Party is in distress. That's a understatement, and to even get back to where they are competitive in any congressional races is going to take a lot of money and a lot of ground game.
As always, there are more than names, proper names anyway, on the ballot. Jay, we'll have some issues that we'll have to discuss.
And we know a handful are already going to be on the ballot because the legislature has placed them there, and in many ways, obviously the highway tax is going to get a fair amount of attention. The governor is investing already a lot of energy in that issue. I think the most interesting ballot measure that we know is going to be on the ballot is a proposal to actually make it harder for citizens to place ballot measures on the ballot. And I think a lot of grassroots organizations really fighting that hard, both on the far left and the far right. It's interesting because the Family Council has used the ballot measure to move the needle on some of the issues they care most about. A lot of progressive organizations have seen the ballot measure as the way to get change done on the progressive side. So I think there's going to be a lot of attention on that issue. And then we are still a little unclear on exactly what citizen initiatives are going to show up, whether we are going to see a first attempt at marijuana, recreational marijuana legalization, if we're going to see issues related to recasting who draws legislative and congressional district lines, which is obviously a very crucial issue moving forward. So we've got an array of issues out there that are floating. We don't know which ones are going to stick and which ones are going to be fleeting.
Yeah, Wes, the lines behind those, the numbers behind those lines, which will be drawn in about a year, we'll start counting noses in a couple of months.
Yeah, in March, and already the Governor Hutchinson has his Census Bureau, the upcoming 2000 population count. In 2016, Arkansas reached a hallmark. We went over the 3 million mark for the first time in our history, so that's a historical mark. And we're right as the 32nd largest state, we're right in the center of actually moving up. Or we could, if we have the undercount that we've had in the last decennial population counts back in 2010, then Arkansas could lose money. They could lose, federal money is based on that population count. So Arkansas has a lot to gain. Governor Hutchinson has put together a committee, and there's also a private, another coalition called the Arkansas Counts that's more so grassroots. So there's a lot of people that are working to make sure that every person is counted, but there is still that undercurrent of in Arkansas, people who are marginalized, who don't get counted, people who may be immigrants, who are there's still myths and urban myths out there that that if an immigrant votes, then they could, they could get in trouble. But so they are going to be in the shadows. So there's efforts to make sure not every citizen, but every resident of the state of Arkansas,
every breathing
person,
human.
Every person is counted. And that has a large impact on the state of Arkansas in terms of federal funds. Governor Hutchinson and some others have estimated that in 2010, we lost almost $1 billion by not having people counted, both in urban areas, particularly around central Arkansas, right around the capital, and in rural areas where in the Delta where you've seen people go to other states, and then but still there are people who are not being counted.
Heather.
And something else too that I'm wondering if the nationalization of elections this year, it's also going to nationalize the politics around the census. Because just last summer, remember, the Trump administration lost a legal bid to get the citizen question on the census questionnaire. And so your point is very well taken that I am really worried about a misinformation campaign about is the citizenship question on the census, because exploiting the low information among either citizens, residents, and believing in the misinformation. And so I think this is also something in the coming months that we might be observing, is that there is this heightened politicization of the census. It's going to be the heightened politicization of counting. It's going to be the heightened politicization of rural versus urban, because of exactly what Wes has outlined is at stake. It's a lot of federal dollars. And also it is the congressional districts, and the state legislature, and the party in power gets the spoils of that battle to draw the lines.
And one of the particular problems in Arkansas is this is the first time that the census, in the history of the census, that the first kind of cast will be online. The census will first try to get people to take that questionnaire online and then by phone, and then they'll go out canvassing the neighborhoods to get people door to door, and that's always a real problem. Yeah. And first of all, if you look at Arkansas and the history of internet access, that issue of getting people online in poor areas is always, Arkansas has about, out of the number of counties that we have, 75 counties, I think there are about half of those counties are what are called HTC counties, or hard to count areas where it's very difficult to get out on the ground and count those people. That's what happened in the last in 2010, and it could be an issue. But Governor Hutchinson and other groups are really trying to tackle this. I think George McGill, who's leading the governor's campaign, the black mayor in Fort Smith, to make sure that every person is counted.
Wes, everybody at DFNA is smiling. I mean, the state's flush with cash, and we keep exceeding revenue projections. Unemployment is low, joblessness very low. What's the outlook? Now we're starting to see some break in the tariff situation on ag products.
Right. I think, unless nationally there's something done that can, it seems like every time the economy gets a good momentum, the Trump administration does something to stop the momentum. You had the recession talk, you got the interest rate issues, but the economy you're still seeing in the marketplace, in the job marketplace, jobs are being added. Last month, it was, I think in the last month of December, I think the estimate is that there are going to be 300,000 people added to. So for the average of 2019, there was about 200,000 average people added to the payrolls every month. If that continues, this talk of a recession is still kind of premature. Still, interest rates are still the issue out there. The Trump administration is trying to hold back the Fed, but I think in 2020, Arkansas economy is going along. We don't do as bad as the national economy, but we don't do it as worse off as some other states. So I think Arkansas economy. You mentioned that we're flush with cash going in. I think there's going to be a fight over a surplus when the legislature come back in town, which is a good thing to have. But unless something is done on the trade issue, I think Arkansas's economy is going to do pretty well. Not as well as it has in the past, but just kind of. But I don't think you're going to have a downturn or where we saw a recession in the past decade.
Okay, education, K-12 and beyond, our last glimpse at the crystal ball. We've got K-12, J-Bar, everyone. Mm-hmm. We can't decide how we're going to decide whether the public schools need more money, or at least we haven't at this particular moment. And in the meantime, higher ed in Arkansas, public and private, is facing, let's not call it a crisis, but a set of daunting circumstances. But Jay, let's start with K-12.
Yeah, so...
or pre-K-12.
Yeah. The adequacy study is what you were referencing. Obviously, Arkansas has under the Lakeview decision of the last decade, is required to provide every child an adequate education. That obviously backs up to money, and figuring out what is really necessary for a truly adequate education is the question. For a number of years, Arkansas has basically done this on a cost of living increase way rather than doing a true adequacy study. There's been a real interest in going out and doing a real comprehensive look at how much it costs in 2020 to educate children in the state. And that itself is political, of course, and so that will be determined, and hopefully, by this time next year, we will know an answer to that question going into the 2021 legislative session. So that's a big issue statewide, and we know that broadband is an issue in areas for education that was not. When Lakeview was decided, and we've got some areas of the state where a lot of kids don't have access to broadband, high-speed broadband, either in their schools or out at home. That's for a good example of a new issue that is a part of some of the challenges of educating children now in a way that it was not in the past.
Yeah. But with full transparency, you have let's say a vested stake in LRSD, Little Rock School District.
I think we all should, as a state.
Any significant movement do you foresee in the months ahead?
Well, we do know that in 2020, if all continues on path, there'll be a big set of school board elections in the city of Little Rock, in the Little Rock School District, which makes up most of the city of Little Rock, and those are going to be huge determinants of the future of that district, the future of recognition of the state's this teachers union in that district, a variety of other issues related to the direction for LRSD. But we're going to see in 2020 a lot of action at the state level, at the LRSD level, at the city level, all around those issues. So it's going to continue to stay in the news, on the front page of the newspaper, as it has for decades.
Yeah, and Heather, higher ed facing daunting challenges, as we said, fiscal, enrollment, that would be tied together. statewide.
And they always are statewide. And every generation of faculty always says that every cohort faces uncertainty. But this really is a lot of uncertainty, and the pivots around very politicized questions of what is the state legislature's commitment to investing in higher education, and public universities do get some investment from the state legislature, even though that is waning. But these campuses in Arkansas are also distressed because as the 2019 headlines showed, that there's several institutions that have lines of credit that are shriveling up, and there are forced retirements, retirement buyouts. So we've got shrinking faculty, but we've also then looking at the number of enrollments and students matriculating, and that's also dwindling as well too. So there's a lot of question marks on the horizon about what does higher education look like in the state, and then that circles back around to the legislature, and it's a very nervous question that if the legislature is seeing that these lower enrollments, does that necessitate more investment in campuses? Of course, campuses are going to say yes, that's investment in higher education, because if that translates into other economic benefits down the road. But there's too many question marks right now as we sit here in January 2020 to see what unfolds. So to be determined, and I hate to leave it there, but to be determined.
We could say that about every year, but especially 2020. May we all survive it. Yeah. And you too, and survive it. And not only that, but prosper and continue to join us every week. See you next week. Happy New Year.
Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and KUAR-FM 89.